If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Almitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
What if, instead of people having to get woke in adulthood, we raised children who were aware of and sensitive to social justice issues from the beginning? Imagine if we all had come to this work as children. What might the world look like if we didn't have to fight for the rights of people because we'd been educated early about the inequities and learned ways to address them? Those words are from my guest today, Dr. Shelby Kretz. Hey there, equity warriors. Thanks for tuning in today. Dr. Kretz is the founder of Little Justice Leaders, an organization that equips educators and families with social justice education resources. She has a Ph.D. in education from UCLA. I have to say, go UC, even though I was an Aggie from Davis. It's okay, same family. She spent over a decade helping parents, teachers, and school leaders empower elementary-aged kids to think critically about justice and equity. Dr. Kretz, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Berry.
I bet you didn't know I was going to start with your words being right out there at you.
I didn't. That was great.
I love that piece, and I just thought the sentiment was so right for our conversation today.
Absolutely.
I want to start by asking you, so that our listeners can connect, if you can share something from your life that was pivotal in shaping who you are today and how that has influenced your work.
Absolutely. So just anything from my life that's been pivotal?
Yeah,
absolutely. So I think a big moment for me, when I was just finishing up my undergrad, I was involved with an after-school program for girls, and we were working in schools across Columbus, Ohio, where we were. And one of the school sites where we were at was labeled at the time one of the lowest performing middle schools in the state of Ohio. And we were working with the young women there, and they were so creative, so brilliant. We worked with them for an entire year, and I was so blown away and impressed by their intelligence, their critical thinking, their creative problem solving. And yet I knew that the system was failing them because obviously they were in what was so-called, a failing school. And I think that moment for me really is what pushed me to realize I wanted to go into education as my career. And I wanted to think about, how do we create systems that support young people's natural curiosities, interests, passions, creativities, rather than, hinders and holds them back. And so that's kind of been the guiding light of my career since that moment.
That's a cool story. Yeah, it's funny how little things that we don't expect will change our whole life trajectory, because we find that thing that sort of ignites our passion and really makes us want to do good things for people. I love that.
Exactly.
So you focus, I told you before, I love the name Little Justice Leaders. I mean, I just get this visual image of little tiny kids doing this work of social justice and understanding how important it is. So why do you think, or why is it so important to introduce social justice concepts to children at the elementary school level?
Great question. I think there's a few reasons, but we'll start with the most practical. Whether we like it or not, kids are being introduced to these topics, right? With the media, the internet, social media, even if you're keeping your kids off of, technology, if they're going to school, if they're spending time with other kids, they're hearing about what's going on in the news much more than kids ever have in the past. And at the same time, we're often afraid to talk about it. And so it creates this taboo around anything related to justice. So I think that's point number one, right? We can't avoid it, even if we wanted to. What we can do is shape the narrative, because if we don't, what then folks online, kids at school, older kids in the neighborhood, those are the folks who will be shaping the narrative. So, and that's, probably not what we want for our kids or for our students. And so I think that's kind of like the most practical of like, even if you're resistant to this idea, that's the reality of the world we're living in. And I think the second point is really, we want to raise kids who are kind, right? Most parents, most educators have a passion for raising and educating young people who are going to be good humans, right? That's part of our goal as educators. And I think when we talk to them about social justice issues, what we're doing in age appropriate ways, of course, we're giving them the tools to make sense of the world around them such that they won't have to, when they're in high school or when they're in college or even later, unlearn all of the stereotypes, biases, prejudices that they have internalized from the world around them. So we're saving them a ton of work in the future. Also a ton of potential harm that they, could have caused. And more importantly, so much good that they can bring to the world, right? So we're not trying to raise necessarily, every child to be an activist. That's not even the intention, but rather every child will go on and, whether they become an artist or an educator, a scientist, or a law enforcement professional, they will bring the lens of justice to that work. And I think when that happens is when we create an entirely different world and a more just world.
I love that. So, let's wrap. There was a lot in there.
Yes.
I want to, because you said you're not teaching every child or raising it. We're not trying to raise, or, some people would use the I word, indoctrinate every child to become, activists for social justice. Let's define, or would you please define social justice in a way that people can understand it, that's meaningful and accessible to adults who might hear this episode, but then also maybe give us a definition that's meaningful for young children, so that people who do listen can say, okay, this is how I can connect that for my child.
Yeah. So the way I think about social justice in the most, kind of the simplistic or basic form is just working to build a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. So that can mean, a lot of different things, but at the core, that's what we're trying to do. And then I also like to bring in examples of topics, because sometimes some folks want it to be a little more tangible. So, tangible, what does that look like? That looks like anti-racism. That looks like building a world of gender equity. That looks like building a world that is accessible for all folks, including those with disabilities or those who are neurodivergent. It means creating a world where we care for and value our earth and create sustainable practices. So those are kind of the more tangible sides of it, and like the topics that we often talk about. But at the root of it, it's just, how can we create a space where all of us can thrive together?
Hey there, Equity Warriors. I want to take a quick moment to share something exciting with you. You know how passionate I am about equity in education, right? Well, I've created a special space, a safe space, where we can dive even deeper into these crucial topics. It's our Patreon channel, and I'd love for you to join me there. Here's why it's so awesome. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll get access to exclusive content that I will not share anywhere else. I'm talking additional insights, workshops like you would get in regular professional learning sessions, resources that can really amplify your impact in education. But it's more than just extra content. By subscribing, you are directly supporting our mission. You're helping to create more valuable discussions and resources that you've come to love. You're part of the change we're making in educational systems. And let me tell you, our Patreon community, it is something special. It's a place where passionate educators and advocates can come together, share ideas, and drive real change. So if you're ready to take your commitment to educational equity to the next level, I'd be thrilled to have you join me. Just head over to patreon.com/3E podcast. That's patreon.com/3E podcast. Remember, your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue this important work. Together, we can create the educational system all our students deserve. Thanks for considering, and now let's get back to the episode. Lovely. You made me think about I have adult children, and my daughter last night, we had this WhatsApp thread going, and she was saying, Mom, you can't eat canned tuna anymore, and you need to stop eating fish altogether because it's destroying the oceans. And she's very, very social justice oriented right now. Her thing is the oceans. But we don't typically, and I would not typically have put the earth into the social justice camp. Right. So I think that's terrific. And it does. I think what it will do when you do that is those people who are, thinking that social justice is this, only about racial equity, allows them to think more broadly. Hopefully their minds are open enough to accept that definition. And I think for kids as well, that's like, I'm just thinking that what a wonderful way to introduce them to help them maybe develop some empathy and understanding about something that they normally wouldn't think about. I think about, as I'm listening to you, I hear people who know me know how old I am, but this is when I give away my age. When I was a kid, my mother didn't let us watch the news. And I did not understand until much later that it was because the only thing that was on the news every night were scenes from the Vietnam War. And at that point in time, she had three brothers. Three of her brothers were all deployed. Wow. Right. So the scenes that were on TV, I didn't know where my uncles were. I mean, I used to see them all the time. And I mean, I was very little. I was just barely past toddlerhood. Not exactly, but we don't have to tell. But recognizing that was her way of keeping us safe. Yeah. But with social media now, there's so much out there that we cannot. I'm so glad I'm not the parent of a young child right now, because there's so much that you cannot protect them from, because it's everywhere. Right. And so if our children are going to be exposed to all of that content that we might or might not want to expose them to at home, if they have developed some empathy and awareness, at least it will help them with processing and really being able to understand what is good and what is bad in a way that we might not normally teach it at home.
Exactly.
So I'm big on strategies. Teachers are always big on strategies. Yeah. So can you give teachers, educators, some practical strategies that they could use in their classroom to start to introduce the concept of social justice? And, as we're talking about that, a lot of people would put, teachers and educators might put the terms equity and inclusion, right? Which in many states is a big no-no to talk about, but we're going to talk about it here.
Yes.
And we can call it whatever we need to call it. But what can they do? What are some strategies that they could use right away in classrooms?
Yes, great question. And I want to acknowledge that teachers are all in very different contexts around this, right? Like Dr. Berry just mentioned, some states aren't going to allow us to call it what it is, and aren't going to allow us to do certain things. So I think the biggest thing is start where you're at, do what you can, and do as much as you can. Now, a very kind of simple, easy place to start is always diversifying your media. So we hear about this a lot, right? Representation matters. We know that's true. And most of us stop at putting a few picture books in our collection that feature kids of color as the protagonist, right? Mm-hmm. That's great. We love that. If that's where you're starting, that's a great step to take. And we need to think so much broader about what actually is diversity, and how do I create representation in my classroom, right? So asking questions like, who's not represented in the picture books in my library? Do I have students with disabilities? Do I have LGBTQ plus families? Do I have people of different religions and faith? Do I have all different stories, whether, they directly impact and connect with students in my class, or introduce them to a different identity that they might not be aware of? So I think that's a really good starting point. Then when we broaden representation more, we can ask, okay, well, we're looking at books, but who's represented in posters? Who's represented in the stories that we read, in the word problems that we use? What kind of names are we using? How can we really think about diversifying even more, taking it another step, kind of further? So I think that's a really good place to start, and always a place we all can continue to deepen and question, who's not represented, and, how else can I bring representation into the space? So I would say, like, start there. I think as kind of a next step is to think about really directly introducing these topics. So instead of introducing a picture book that features, let's say, a character of color or a character with a disability, you bring in a book about racism or about ableism and actually start to have that conversation, or about folks who have fought for justice in different scenarios. And then you bring those stories into the lesson. So then you're getting more directly into, we're actually talking about the issue and not just, enriching our classroom with, the beautiful diversity, which is a great place to start. And then we want to go deeper. Yeah.
Do you think that most educators are equipped to have those heavier conversations?
That's
or do they need professional development? Is that something that you all do?
Yes, and we do offer professional development. We also have a full school curriculum for schools that are interested. We have a ton of resources for individual teachers or families that want to start this work but maybe aren't sure where to start. But I always do say, like, you don't have to purchase anything, to do this work. We put out a ton of free resources as well as like other organizations do the same. I think the biggest thing kind of holding most teachers back in this work is, fear and kind of just a lack of confidence around having the conversations. Sometimes we're going to stumble through them, right? Nobody is an expert on every topic of social justice. There's too many topics. There's too many lived identities. None of us can understand all of them. And yet it's our job as educators to do the best we can to represent, different folks, different identities, different experiences. And that means sometimes we're going to get it wrong. That means sometimes we are not going to have the answer to a question, or a student is going to say a comment that is, inappropriate or off the wall, and you don't know how to respond. Like, that's just the reality of this work. And so sometimes it's just a matter of like pushing ourselves to get over that fear. Now, that being said, you need some baseline knowledge, right? If this is like the first you're ever hearing of DEI and social justice, you want to educate yourself first. That's very, very important, because you can cause harm in doing this work. But generally speaking, trying to do the work is going to be better than not trying to do the work. And for you, if you truly feel like you don't know enough, then it definitely starts with learning for yourself. But if you have done some reading, you've done some listening to podcasts, you've done some self-reflection, then sometimes what you really just need is the push for someone to say, just start doing it. Just start having the conversations. Just start bringing the books into the space. And the biggest tip, especially if you're afraid, is letting the kids guide the conversation, right? We don't need to shape the narrative. We're there, obviously, as a guide, and to protect against harm that could come up, which is really, really important. And most of the time, kids can navigate these conversations, right? They come with ideas. They come with experiences. They come with creativity and insight and so much empathy and so much kindness. Right, if we're working with young kids.
With the littles, yes.
With the littles, yes. The littles come with so much kindness and open-mindedness, and the older ones come with a little more criticality and more experience. And so either way, what you have is young people who can, guide this conversation and ask the questions, and also let you know how deep to go, right? By what they're saying, by the comments they're making, by the questions they're asking. So if you're like, oh, I don't want to go over their head, good. Start by asking them, hey, has anyone ever heard the word racism? Does anyone know what that means? Right? That's going to give you a sense of where are they starting from? Like, how do I not come in way over their heads, or how do I not come in super patronizing to their own experiences, right? So I think letting them guide it, but also what I find is most teachers really just need the push to say, it's okay. Just go for it. And make sure you have some education first. That's really important as well. Yeah.
Go for it, as long as you don't live in a state where teachers are getting fired for doing any of that work. Be very, very careful.
Exactly.
Yes. And I think one of the fears that popped into my head immediately is that And I always pick on Johnny. So little Johnny's going to run home and tell mom and dad or caregiver, whoever's at home, this is what my teacher said in school today. And little Johnny might get it not quite right. And, that starts a whole snowball of challenges for a teacher. So I know that particularly classroom educators that are in places where they're banning books and that, DEI has been demonized and they can't use the R word, R words, race or racism. And even in some states where they cannot do any work on socio-emotional skills. I mean, just, it runs the gamut, that there is a great amount of fear there. But if you make this about a broader understanding of just human empathy, and getting to know people who don't look like you, respecting and understanding their culture, who they are, their stories, then you don't have to use those words and you can still get the work done. Fingers crossed.
Exactly. And I think that's such an important point, right? We have to acknowledge the context of the reality and the beauty of how many teachers are fighting back and resisting in various ways, right? To the degree that you can and are able, depending again on who you are, your own personal needs and securities, and then also the state you're in, and sometimes more importantly, the school leadership you have. All of that being said, I think communicating with parents and caregivers more is always a good thing. That part of the work can feel sometimes the absolute scariest, but letting, families know, hey, we're going to be talking about this, or we're going to be reading this picture book. Here's why, right? Here's what I want our students to learn. Here's what I hope they're going to take from it. And I'm open for questions. I'm open if you have, concerns, reach out to me. It feels really scary putting ourselves out there. What we find is, sometimes parents and caregivers, of course, do have concerns, and often they want to be heard. And when we can meet and say, hey, like, we are reading this book, let's say a picture book about an immigrant, right, coming into a new class. Now, everyone's parents might have completely different views on immigration. They probably do. But that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about, do you want your child to be kind if a kid who is from another country joins our class? And when it comes down to that, most parents are going to say yes, right? Do you want your child to be kind to whoever's sitting next to them? Well, yes, right? We can often find common ground. I won't say always, but almost always we can find common ground on that. And I'm not, and then you say, I'm not, we're not talking immigration policy. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about how can you be kind to someone you meet who doesn't speak your language? And what does that look like in a classroom setting? And you can do that through picture books or however you're doing it. But I think those kind of conversations can really help caregivers see, okay, and can calm their fears. They have valid fears because there's so much fear mongering in the media about what's happening in classrooms, right? So we can't dismiss or diminish the real concerns folks have for their kids and what they're learning. But when we're open and we say, this is the intent and this is what we're doing, and, it's really not political, oftentimes parents are grateful that you're honest and that you're open. And even if they don't 100% agree, they often can respect that.
Yeah. So you actually sort of answered the next question I wanted to ping you on, which really is, what is it that parents and caregivers can do at home that will complement what's happening in the classroom when teachers are doing this work?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question as well. And we do have resources for parents too. So we like to, support the work at all stages. But I think continuing to have these conversations at home, especially if like so many parents, that your kids are not getting this work at school because of the new regulations, or maybe just because of where you live, then I think it becomes even more important to start these conversations at home. And it can be natural, right? It does not have to be super forced. It can be, hey, we're watching a movie and you call out a gender stereotype that comes up, and ask your child, like, hey, what do you think about that? Does that seem right? Does that align with what you know about gender or anything? And then just let them talk. Sometimes we have to let them talk, let them share their ideas more, rather than, kind of coming in with a lecture. So I think you can really easily weave it into kind of the day-to-day life, whether you're in the classroom or at home.
Yeah. And I think, back to early elementary, it's so much more important to start this work early because they're going to hit that adolescent stage where they just don't answer you, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we're thinking of younger kids at this stage for sure.
Yeah. So let's get them. We've touched on and mentioned that today's political climate is so polarizing. And, I'm not a fearmonger, but I'm hearing from so many people that they're just so afraid, from educators who are afraid to talk in their classrooms, who are afraid to say anything. Are you experiencing that type of maybe pushback or schools not wanting to do the work out of fear?
Sadly, we are. We're seeing it because there's real fear around losing jobs or for school leaders losing funding, right? So I think at this point, what we really need is school leadership, school leaders who are willing to back teachers up, right? Willing to support teachers, willing to say, you will not get fired for engaging in these conversations. We find that teachers who have school leadership like that are so much more confident, so much more comfortable being able to engage in this work, knowing that school leadership has their back. Now, if that's not the case for you, obviously it just makes it so much harder to think about how you weave this in. And maybe for you, advocacy looks like trying to, push your school leader just a little bit to allow maybe more diverse books or to allow maybe a cultural celebration. And maybe, that's the best you can do. And I think what we all kind of need to think about right now is, what can I do? Even if it feels so small, those small acts are acts of resistance. And that's what we need right now on a mass scale.
Yeah. It is April, and April is Arab American Heritage, Middle Eastern, North African Heritage Month. Yeah. And so I did put out a book list for educators for everything from read alouds for the littles to young adult chapter books for the high school. And so sort of in alignment, what I suggested is if you cannot teach the way you want to, you can still have the stories, but you make the theme a little more general, right? Mm-hmm. So you can, I don't want to use the term whitewash, but you can sort of sanitize it a little bit so that you are not under the radar or accused of doing something that in your state or community would be deemed DEI and get yourself into trouble. But if you can, as you think about the different things that are going on, just go ahead and find those books. And I even tell teachers, just because you teach, the end of my classroom teaching, I taught 6th grade. And I still did read alouds with my adolescents. And they would sit on the carpet just like kindergartners and they still want it. I did read alouds when I taught high school. And they were the same way. We can introduce themes to them and content to them in a very, I'll say, picture book fashion, right? Yeah. But still those themes are heavy. And if we've set the stage for them, they'll continue to have those conversations and start to ask questions. You won't even have to feed them.
Exactly. I love that so much. And kids love stories. All humans love stories, right? We all love stories. Whether it's, a movie or a short video or a picture book, whatever it is that you're able to use. And I love what you said, Dr. Berry, of like, they're going to lead the conversation. And then it's, again, not you coming in with a plan, coming in with a lecture, but really them making sense of the world around them. When you ask kids, like, what are the things you care about? What's going on in your community that you're interested in? Are there issues or problems in your community that you care about? Then it's not you bringing the problems to them, but them recognizing, things that they want to see in the world. And maybe the first time you ask, they don't have ideas, but you've planted the seed. And now a year later, they've been, looking for that. And they see, oh, actually, like I've noticed a lot of litter in our neighborhood and I want to clean that up. Or I've noticed, that there's an issue with hunger. And a lot of folks in our community are experiencing food insecurity. Like, what can we do about that? They start to notice and they start to ask the questions themselves, and then they're leading the work.
Yes, and that makes our lives so much easier.
It really does.
I have one last question for you, and it's, I always like to close with the work of the words of Dr. Angela Davis. She said, "I'm changing the things I cannot accept." So for you in particular, if you could change one systemic issue in K-12 education to better support social justice, what would it be?
Oh, that's such a good question, and such a tricky one at this moment. I think, if I could change one thing right now in K-12 education, it would be lifting any bans on related to DEI, diversity, or social justice. I think those bans are causing more stress on an issue that's already hard. Like, it's already hard to talk to kids about justice because there's a million reasons, right, we could be talking about, but instead we're talking about the laws that didn't exist just a few years ago. And if we could lift those, then we could make progress a lot faster.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
So how can people reach you if they'd like more information? We'll make sure it's down in the notes, but for those people who might just be listening and not have access.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a guide for talking to kids about current events that's going to walk you through exactly how to respond when they hear about something, or if you want to bring up a topic, related to a current event or a social justice issue, which I think, related to our conversation today might be useful. And so you can get that at LJL.Education/3E. So I made that just for this. So just LJL.Education/3E. It's a free guide and it can kind of walk you through that. If you want to learn more about our work in general, littlejusticeleaders.com is where you're going to find it. We're also at Little Justice Leaders on all the social platforms, especially on Instagram. We do a lot of educating, a lot of free resources. We're getting more into YouTube as well. And then on our website, you'll see the programs that we have available for individual teachers and families, or if you are a school leader and you want to, be the leader for this work, we also have a program for schools.
Awesome. Okay, and we'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes as well. Equity Warriors. Today's conversation reminds us of the power of starting early when it comes to teaching kids about justice and empathy. So if you're a parent, caregiver, or an educator, please take the first step by exploring the resources like those from Little Justice Leaders to spark meaningful conversations with children about equity and fairness. Let's work to raise a generation of change makers together. Dr. Shelby Kretz, thank you so much for joining me today. I loved our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Berry.
And to you educators and equity warriors out there, make sure you've picked up your copy of The Culturally Competent Educator and join me for book study on Patreon. And then join me here again next episode. And if you have a question, a topic you'd like covered, or a special request, let me know by shooting me a text. And as always, don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the 3E Podcast. Now, here's how you can make a real difference. First, smash that subscribe button. It's free. It's easy. Just do it. Second, share the show with anyone you know who cares about education. And third, consider becoming a supporter of the show. Together, we're not just talking about change, we're making it happen. Make a donation today to be part of that mission and change, and I'll catch you next time.